women who have been executed in the United States. It's a difficult and often overlooked topic. We'll be exploring the stories behind these individuals, their crimes, and their final moments. Since 1976, 17 women have been executed. Women represent less than 1.1% of all the executions performed in the United States. Here are their crimes they committed, their last words, and their last meals. Margie Velma Barfield was born on October 29, 1932, in South Carolina. She was the first of 9 children born to a poor farming family. Barfield dropped out of school after the 8th grade to help support her family. She worked as a waitress, a factory worker, and a housekeeper before becoming a nurse's aide. Barfield was married twice. Her first marriage to Thomas Burke ended in divorce in 1970. Her second marriage to Hubert Barfield ended in his death. Barfield was arrested in 1984 for the murder of her husband. She confessed to the crime and was sentenced to death. Barfield was executed by lethal injection on November 2, 1984, at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was 52 years old. Barfield's last meal consisted of cheese doodles, Coca-Cola, and her last words were, "I know that everyone has gone through a lot of pain. All of the family is connected, and I'm sorry. And I want to thank everyone who's been supporting me all these 6 years." Barfield's execution was the first in the United States since the Supreme Court lifted the moratorium on capital punishment in 1976. It was also the first execution of a woman in the United States since 1962. Carla Faye Tucker was born on November 18, 1959, and died on February 3, 1998. She was an American woman sentenced to death for killing 2 people, Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton, with a pickaxe during a burglary in 1983. She was 24 years old at the time, and Tucker was convicted of capital murder in Texas in 1984. She spent 14 years on death row. During that time, she became a born-again Christian and advocated to abolish the death penalty. Tucker's execution was the first execution of a woman in Texas since 1863. Due to her gender and widely publicized conversion to Christianity, her execution inspired an unusually large national and international movement in an attempt to reduce her sentence to life without parole, a movement that included a few foreign government officials. For her last meal, Tucker requested a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with French dressing. Her last words were, "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, that Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I'm so sorry. I hope God will give you peace in this." Looking at her husband, she said, "Baby, I love you." Looking at Ronald Carson, she said, "Ron, give Peggy a hug for me." Then she looked at all present, weeping and smiling. "Everyone has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Baggett, thank you all so much. You have been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I'll wait for you." As the lethal injection chemicals were being administered, she praised Jesus. Licking her lips, looking at the ceiling, she was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m., 8 minutes after the lethal injection was emitted. Judy Buenoano was born on April 4, 1943, and led a life shadowed by suspicion and tragedy. Her story is a chilling tale of alleged manipulation, murder, and a desperate quest for financial gain. She became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848 and the first to be electrocuted in the U.S. since 1976. Judy's first husband, James Goodyear, died in 1971 under circumstances that would later raise red flags. It was after the death of her son Michael in 1980 and the attempted murder of her boyfriend John Gentry in 1983 that authorities began to piece together a disturbing pattern. Judy was also linked to the 1978 death of her boyfriend Bobby Joe Morris in Colorado. By the time investigators connected her to Morris, she was already facing the death penalty in Florida. Prosecutors argued that Judy systematically eliminated those closest to her for financial gain, primarily through life insurance policies. The details of her crimes painted a picture of a cold and calculated individual. The motive behind each crime was money. At her trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Judy had meticulously planned each crime. Motivated by greed, the defense argued that she was not guilty and that the evidence was circumstantial. However, the jury found her guilty of murder of her husband and son and the attempted murder of her boyfriend. Judy was executed in Florida's electric chair on March 30, 1998. Her last meal consisted of broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, and hot tea. When asked if she had any last words, she offered a simple, "No, sir." So far, we've examined 3 truly challenging cases. It really makes you think about the death penalty as a whole. What are you thinking? Should it be abolished? Let's discuss it in the comments. Also, if you're enjoying this video and the series so far, please click on the like button as it really does help support my channel. Thank you so much. Betty Lou Beets, born on March 12, 1937, led a difficult life that ended in her execution on February 24, 2000. Her story is a complex web of multiple marriages, allegations of abuse, and ultimately a conviction of murder. Beets was married 6 times, twice to the same man. Her relationship history was marked by conflict and accusations of violence. In 1970, she shot her second husband, Billy York Lane, twice in the back. She was acquitted after Billy admitted that he had threatened her life first, and the two remarried, divorcing again a month later. In 1978, she attempted to run over her third husband, Ronnie C. Treckle, with her car. Both Billy York Lane and Ronnie C. Treckle testified against her at her murder trial. In 1983, she was convicted of shooting her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, on August 6th. This conviction led to her death sentence. Prosecutors argued that Beets deliberately shot her husband and then attempted to cover up the crime. The defense painted a picture of a woman who had been abused and was acting in self-defense, but the jury did not accept this argument. Beets' case sparked debate about domestic violence, self-defense, and the complexities of abuse. Her supporters argued that she was a victim of long-term abuse and that her actions should have been seen in context. Others pointed to her history of violence and argued that she was a dangerous individual and deserved to be punished for her crimes. Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection at 6:18 p.m. on February 24, 2000, in the Huntsville unit in Texas. She did not request a final meal, nor did she have any last words. Her silence at the end only added to the enigma of her story. Beets was the second woman to be executed in the state of Texas after the reintroduction of the death penalty. Born on September 2, 1971, Christina Marie Riggs' story was of heart-wrenching tragedy that ended in her execution on May 2, 2000. Hers is a case that delves into the depths of maternal desperation and mental anguish. Riggs, a licensed practical nurse, was convicted on November 1997 for the murders of her 2 young children, Justin, age 5, and Shelby, age 2. The circumstances surrounding the children's death were particularly disturbing. Riggs had planned to kill them with injections of drugs she obtained from the hospital. When an initial injection of potassium chloride into her son caused pain and not death, she resorted to smothering the children. Afterwards, she attempted suicide. The scene that awaited the first responders was one of utter despair, a mother seemingly unable to cope with the weight of her personal demons taking the lives of her own children. During her trial, defense attorneys brought up Riggs' struggles with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. These mental health issues, they argued, contributed to her actions. However, Riggs herself offered no defense during the penalty phase of the trial, choosing not to contest the death sentence. She later waived her appeals and seemingly resigned to her fate. Her case became a stark reminder of the immense strain and often hidden struggles faced by individuals battling mental illness. Christina Marie Riggs was executed by lethal injection less than 2 years after her convictions. She became the first woman to be executed in Arkansas since 1845. Her final statement was a gut-wrenching expression of remorse. "No words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. No way can I make up for or take away the pain I've caused everyone who knew and loved them." Her last words were simple, "I love you, my babies," and then she was executed with potassium chloride injection. Jean Ellen, born August 17, 1959, was a figure who made a significant mark in the history of capital punishment. She was executed on January 11, 2001, after being sentenced to death in 1989 for the murder of her long-term girlfriend, Gloria Leathers. Ellen's case was particularly notable as she became the first Black woman to be executed in the U.S. since 1954 and the 6th Black woman to be executed since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1976. While prosecutors presented a case that led to Ellen's conviction, some supporters and legal advocates questioned the fairness of the trial and the evidence presented. They pointed to aspects of the case that they felt were not thoroughly investigated or adequately considered by the court. During her time on death row, Ellen maintained a sense of composure and even displayed a degree of defiance in the face of impending execution. Her final meal request was simple, a bag of potato chips. Her last words uttered while lying on the execution gurney were a direct quote from Jesus, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." She also offered a poignant gesture to appease her lawyer, David Pressman, who had become her friend. She stuck her tongue out and smiled at him, a small act of defiance and perhaps a final farewell. Preston later recounted that Ellen appeared to be dancing on the mattress as the execution process began. Jean Ellen's execution brought renowned attention to the issue of capital punishment and its application, particularly considering race and gender. Her case remains a subject of debate and discussion among those who study and advocate for changes in the justice system. Marilyn K. Plantz, born August 20th, 1961, orchestrated a chilling plot that led to her execution on May 1st, 2001. Her case is an example of greed and manipulation, resulting in the murder of her husband, Lance K., for a hefty life insurance payout. Kay hired her teenage boyfriend, Clifford Bryson, and his friend, William McKimble, to carry out the gruesome act. On October 14, 1996, Lance K. was ambushed by Bryson and McKimble upon returning home from work, while Marilyn and her children were reportedly sleeping in bed. The two young men brutally beat Lance with baseball bats to further obscure the crime and to make it appear accidental. Marilyn instructed them to burn the body. The brutality and calculated nature of the crime shocked the community and underscored the lengths of which she was willing to go for financial gain. The trial revealed that Marilyn K. stood to gain approximately $300,000 from her husband's life insurance policy. This significant sum served as the primary motive for murder, according to prosecutors. The evidence presented painted a picture of a woman coldly planning her husband's demise, using younger individuals to carry out the violent act. Marilyn K.'s case was also intertwined with those of her accomplices, Clifford Bryson, who was 19 at the time of the murder and also sentenced to death and executed on June 15, 2000, and William McKimble, who was also charged with first-degree murder, pleaded guilty, and received a life imprisonment sentence in exchange for his testimony against Kay and Bryson. This complex web of individuals and their roles in the crime added further layers to the case. At 40 years old, Marilyn K. was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Her last words were a message to her children, Trina and Chris, who did not attend the execution. "I want to tell my family that I love them very much, especially Trina and Chris." She also added a religious message. "What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world. And I just want all you to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And if y'all want to see me again, you must be born again." For her last meal, Kay made an extensive request: 1 chicken taco salad, 1 Mexican pizza, 2 enchiladas, 2 chicken soft tacos, 1 order of cinnamon twists, 1 piece of pecan pie, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. Lois Nadine Smith's case is a chilling example of family violence taken to the most extreme. Convicted of the July 4, 1982 murder of 21-year-old Cindy Bailey, Smith's actions sent shockwaves through her community. Cindy Bailey was a former girlfriend of Smith's son, Greg Smith, and the motive behind the murder stemmed from a mix of jealousy, anger, and a mother's perceived need to protect her child. The circumstances surrounding Cindy Bailey's abduction and murder are particularly disturbing. Early in the morning of July 4th, Smith, along with her son and another woman, picked up Bailey from a motel in Oklahoma. As they drove away, a confrontation erupted. Smith accused Bailey of spreading rumors that led to Greg Smith facing murder charges. Bailey denied the accusations, but the situation quickly escalated. Lois began choking Bailey and then stabbed her in the throat while still in the car. The violence didn't end there. The group then drove to the home of Smith's ex-husband, where the situation took an even darker turn. Smith forced Bailey to sit in a recliner and taunted her with a pistol. Finally, she fired several shots at Bailey, and Bailey lay on the floor while her son reloaded the pistol. Smith reportedly laughed and jumped on Bailey's neck. This level of brutality and seemingly callous disregard for human life shocked the investigators and the community. At her trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a calculated and merciless killer. The defense, if any, was not reported on. The jury returned a guilty verdict and Smith was sentenced to death. Her case brought attention to the issue of domestic violence and the lengths to which some individuals will go to protect their families, or what they perceived as protection. Lois Nadine Smith's last meal request was extensive: barbecued ribs, onion rings, strawberry banana cake, and cherry lemonade. Her last words were an apology and a plea for forgiveness, both to the victims' families and to those who had been affected by her actions. To the families, I want to say I'm sorry for the pain and loss I've caused you. I ask that you forgive me. You must forgive to be forgiven. Linda Cheryl Lyons Block, born on February 8, 1948, met her end on May 10, 2002. Her case is a complex and controversial one, involving the death of an American police sergeant and raising questions about self-defense and the heat of the moment. Block and her common-law husband, George Sibley, were on the run from Florida authorities after failing to appear for sentencing on an assault charge. Their journey led them to a Walmart parking lot in Alabama, where a seemingly ordinary encounter with law enforcement turned deadly. On October 4, 1993, Police Sergeant Roger Motley approached Sibley's parked car after a concerned passerby reported that a young boy in the vehicle appeared to need help. Sibley, by his own account, was explaining his belief that he wasn't required to have a driver's license when he noticed the officer placing his hand on his gun. This prompted Sibley to draw his own weapon and begin firing at Motley, who returned fire, wounding Sibley. The sequence of events then becomes contested. Witnesses stated that Sibley fired first. Block, who was at a nearby payphone, heard the gunfire and drew her own weapon. Witnesses described her being in a crouched position when she fired. Block claimed that she fired only as she stopped running towards the officer. As the officer turned to face Block, she fired again, hitting him in the chest. Tragically, Motley had given his bulletproof vest to another officer earlier that day. The key part of the contention was who fired the fatal shot. The prosecution argued that both Block and Sibley were responsible for Motley's death, regardless of who fired the bullet that ultimately killed him. The defense likely argued that Block was acting in self-defense or in the defense of her husband, claiming she only fired after seeing Motley draw his weapon. Despite the uncertainty, both Block and Sibley were convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Linda Cheryl Lyons Block was executed on May 10, 2002. In her final hours, she spent several hours with 3 friends and a spiritual advisor. She chose not to request a last meal, nor did she make a final statement. At 12:10 a.m., she was pronounced dead. Block's execution was notable as it marked the last time a person was executed by electrocution in the state of Alabama. If you're still with us this far, I want to thank you for sticking around, and if you're enjoying this video, please comment, like, or subscribe, as it really does support my channel and me. Thank you so very much. Aileen Wuornos, born February 29, 1956, led a troubled life that led to her execution on October 9, 2002. Her story is one of alleged abuse, survival, and a series of violent acts that led to her being labeled as a serial killer. Wuornos' case is highly controversial, with many arguing that she was a victim of severe abuse and was acting in self-defense, while others viewed her as a dangerous criminal. Between 1989 and 1990, while working as a prostitute along the highways in Florida, Wuornos shot and killed 7 of her male clients. She claimed that each of these men had either assaulted or attempted to assault her, and the homicides were acts of self-defense. She asserted that she had endured years of abuse and that her actions were a desperate attempt to protect herself from further harm. This defense was met with skepticism by prosecutors, who argued that she had ample opportunities to escape or seek help instead of resorting to lethal force. Wuornos' trial was highly publicized, and her supporters portrayed her as a victim of the system that failed to protect her, and they argued that her actions were a result of severe trauma. Opponents pointed to the number of victims and circumstances of the killings, claiming that her actions were beyond self-defense. The jury ultimately found her guilty, and she was sentenced to death. During her time on death row, Aileen maintained her claims of innocence and spoke out against the death penalty. She also gained a significant following of supporters who believed in her cause. For her last meal, Aileen declined a special request, which could have been anything under $20, and she opted for a simple cup of coffee instead. Her final words were rambling and cryptic statements that have been interpreted in various ways. Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership, and all, I'll be back. Aileen's execution brought significant attention to the issues of self-defense, abuse, and the treatment of sex workers. Her case continues to be a subject of debate and discussion, with many still questioning the fairness of her conviction and sentence. Frances Newton, born April 12, 1965, was executed on September 14, 2005, after a nearly 17-year battle to prove her innocence. Her case revolves around a brutal murder of her husband Adrian, 23, her son Alton, 7, and her daughter Farah, just 21 months old. All three victims were shot with a pistol that belonged to a man Newton was seeing. From the beginning, Newton maintained her innocence, claiming that an illegal drug dealer killed her family. However, the Houston Police Department presented a different narrative, stating that Newton's husband was involved in drug dealing and owed a significant debt to his supplier. This debt, they argued, led to the fatal encounter. Newton's supporters, however, strongly believed in her innocence and felt that the investigation was mishandled. Several factors contributed to the suspicions surrounding Newton. 3 weeks before the murders, she had purchased life insurance policies for herself, her husband, and her daughter, each worth $50,000, naming herself as the sole beneficiary on her husband's and daughter's policies. Additionally, the murder weapon was found in a paper bag at a relative's home shortly after the killings, allegedly placed there by Newton. These pieces of evidence, combined with the prosecution's arguments, led to her conviction and death sentence on October 25, 1988. Newton's case garnered attention from various advocacy groups and individuals who believed that she was wrongly convicted. They pointed to inconsistencies in the evidence and argued that the police had not thoroughly investigated other possible suspects. Despite these efforts and numerous appeals, her conviction and sentence were upheld. In the end, Frances Elaine Newton maintained her innocence. She declined her last meal and made no final statement, her silence adding to the many unanswered questions surrounding her case. She was the third woman executed in Texas since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1982. Teresa Lewis, born on April 26, 1969, was a woman whose story ended in her execution on September 23, 2010. Her case stands out as she was the only woman on death row in Virginia at the time of her execution and the first woman to be executed in the state since 1912. Lewis was convicted of orchestrating the October of 2002 murders of her husband, Julian Lewis Jr., and her stepson, Charles J. Lewis, in order to collect a $250,000 life insurance policy. The details of the murders revealed a chilling level of premeditation and manipulation. Teresa Lewis conspired with two teenage boys, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, to carry out the killings. She provided them with the weapon and instructed them on how to enter the home. On the night of the murders, she left the back door unlocked and waited outside while Schallenberger and Fuller went inside and shot her husband and stepson. Prosecutors argued that Lewis's motive was purely financial, driven by the desire to collect the insurance money. The defense, however, presented a different picture, suggesting that Lewis was a victim of domestic abuse and that the teenage boys had manipulated her. These arguments did not sway the jury, and Lewis was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Lewis's case garnered significant attention and sparked debates about the death penalty, particularly concerning the culpability of individuals who may be influenced by others. Some argued that Lewis was the mastermind, while others believed she was a vulnerable person who had been taken advantage of. Despite appeals and petitions for clemency, her conviction and sentence was upheld. In her final hours, Teresa prayed and sang hymns. For her last meal, she requested 2 fried chicken breasts, sweet peas and butter, a Dr. Pepper, and an apple pie for dessert. Her last words were directed at her stepdaughter, Kathy Lewis Clifton, who was present to witness the execution. I just want Kathy to know that I love you and I'm very sorry. She also apologized for killing her brother and father. Teresa's execution brought to light the complexities of criminal culpability and the difficult questions surrounding capital punishment, especially in cases revolving manipulation and potential victimization. Kimberly McCarthy, born on March 18, 1961, became the 500th person executed by the state of Texas on June 26, 2013. Her case involved a brutal murder of her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth. in Lancaster, Texas, during a robbery in 1997. While McCarthy was convicted solely for Booth's murder, she was also suspected in the deaths of 2 other elderly women in Texas, although she was never formally charged in those cases. This added layer of suspicion contributed to the notoriety of her case. The murder of Dorothy Booth was particularly violent and disturbing. Booth, a retired college professor, was found stabbed to death in her home. McCarthy was seen near the scene of the crime and was quickly identified as a suspect. Evidence at the trial indicated that McCarthy had entered Booth's home with the intent to rob her. The encounter turned violent, leading to Booth's tragic death. The details of the crime painted a picture of a desperate act fueled by robbery, leaving the community shaken. During her trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case, linking McCarthy to the crime scene and establishing a motive. The defense, however, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that reasonable doubt existed. The jury, after hearing all the evidence, found McCarthy guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to death. McCarthy's case raised concerns about the justice system and the death penalty, particularly given the nature of her crimes and the questions surrounding her involvement in the other deaths. Her execution, being the 500th in Texas, drew extra attention from media and advocacy groups, highlighting the ongoing debates about capital punishment in the United States. In her final moments, Kimberly McCarthy expressed a message of faith and hope, focusing on her spiritual beliefs. Texas had ceased offering special last meals to death row inmates. Because of that, McCarthy was served the regular prison dinner for her last meal. Her last words were, "This is not a loss, this is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." And she was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m., adding another name to the long list of those executed in Texas. Susan Margaret Basso, born May 15, 1954, met her end on February 5, 2014. Her case is a chilling example of manipulation, greed, and extreme violence. Basso was one of 6 co-defendants convicted of a horrific torture and murder of Louis "Buddy" Musso, a mentally disabled man, in August of 1998. The motive behind this horrible crime was Musso's life insurance money, a testament to the depths of human depravity. The details of Buddy Musso's murder are particularly gruesome and disturbing. Basso and her accomplices subjected him to prolonged and sadistic torture before his death. He was beaten, starved, and forced to endure forms of abuse, all while being held captive. The perpetrator's goal was to collect the substantial life insurance policy and Social Security that named Basso as the beneficiary. The sheer brutality and calculated nature of the crime shocked even the most seasoned investigators and prosecutors. My next video will be of Susan Basso with an in-depth discussion of the crime and the motive, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Basso's trial brought to light the extent of her involvement with her role in orchestrating the events that led to Musso's death. The prosecution successfully argued that Basso was the mastermind behind the plot, manipulating others to carry out the violent acts while she reaped the financial benefits. The defense, if any, was not noted. The jury found her guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death. Susan Basso's case raised serious questions about the exploitation of vulnerable individuals and the lengths to which some will go for monetary gain. The depravity of the crime and the exploitation of Musso's disability made the case particularly disturbing and garnered significant media attention. In her final hours, Susan Basso did not request a special meal, as Texas had ceased offering them. Instead, she ate the regular prison fare of baked chicken, fish, boiled eggs, carrots, green beans, and sliced bread. When asked if she had a last statement, she simply replied to the prison staff, "No, sir." She was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m., bringing an end to one of the most disturbing cases in Texas history. I just wanted to take a quick pause to thank you once again for watching my videos and supporting my channel. If you could please consider leaving me a comment on how you think I'm doing or how I might be able to improve the channel for you, your input is very important because I appreciate you being here with me. The tragic story of Devontae Williams, a 9-year-old boy who died of malnutrition and abuse in his Arlington, Texas apartment in 2004, stands as a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerability of children and the horrifying consequences of neglect. At the time of his death, Devante weighed a mere 35 pounds, a shocking testament to the severe deprivation he endured. His body bore scars of unimaginable suffering, infected wounds from being bound by plastic cords, and other signs of physical abuse. Devante's mother, Marcella Williams, and her partner, Lisa Ann Coleman, were arrested and charged with capital murder. Marcella Williams eventually entered a guilty plea in exchange for her sentence of life imprisonment, while Lisa Ann Coleman chose to go to trial. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. The details of Devante's life and death painted a grim picture of isolation and abuse. He was essentially starved, and his body showed signs of chronic malnourishment. The physical evidence was overwhelming. His tiny frame and extensive scarring and the infected wounds all told a story of prolonged and systematic abuse. A bloodstain found on a golf club in the home further suggested physical violence. The fact that he had a healing tear where his ear meets the side of his head also points towards further abuse. Lisa Ann Coleman's trial brought to light the horrific conditions under which Devante lived. The prosecution argued that both women were responsible for his death, whether through direct action or neglect. The defense, if any, was not well reported. The jury's verdict reflected the severity of the crime, and Coleman was sentenced to death. Lisa Coleman was executed by lethal injection on September 17, 2014. She was pronounced dead at 6:42 p.m. In her final moments, Coleman expressed love and encouragement for her friends and family watching through the window. She maintained her composure, smiling and nodding to her supporters, and said, "I'm all right. Tell them I finished strong." And then she mouthed a kiss and nodded to her witnesses before the lethal drug took effect. For her last meal, as was the policy in Texas at the time, she received the regular prison meal, which included fried pork chop, macaroni and cheese, carrots, green beans, navy beans, sliced bread, and a pineapple orange cake. The case of Devante Williams remains a chilling reminder of the importance of protecting vulnerable children and the tragic consequences of abuse and neglect. It also brings up the difficult question of accountability. Kelly Gissendaner, born March 8, 1968, was executed September 30, 2015, in Georgia. Her case was particularly notable as she was the only woman on death row in the state at the time. Kelly was convicted of orchestrating the 1997 murder of her husband Douglas. The details of the crime, her relationship with her lover, and the legal proceedings that followed drew significant public attention. Kelly was 28 years old when her husband Douglas, 30, was stabbed to death by her lover, Gregory Owen. Kelly had met Owen at a bar, and the two began an affair. She later recruited Owen to kill her husband, promising him a share of the insurance money. Owen carried out the murder, and Kelly attempted to make it appear as though it was a random crime. However, her involvement was quickly discovered. During the trial, Gregory testified against Kelly as part of a plea bargain. He received a life sentence, sparing him from the death penalty. Kelly's defense focused on portraying her as a victim of abuse and manipulation by Owen, arguing that she was not the mastermind of the murder. However, the jury found her guilty of murder and sentenced her to death. Kelly's case sparked conversations about gender roles, domestic abuse, and the culpability of individuals in relationships where power dynamics are complex. Supporters argued that she was a victim who deserved leniency, while others maintained that she was responsible for her actions. Despite appeals and clemency requests, her sentence was upheld. In her final hours, Kelly was visited by family and a spiritual advisor. She requested a specific last meal: cheese dip and chips, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade. As she was being prepared for execution, she cried, prayed, and sang Amazing Grace. Her last words were a message of love and forgiveness. "I love you, Sally, and I love you, Susan. Let my kids know I went out singing Amazing Grace. And tell the Gissendaner family I am so sorry that amazing man lost his life because of me. And if I could take it back, if this would change it, I would have done it a long time ago. But it's not. And I just hope they can find peace, and I hope they find some happiness. God bless you." She was pronounced dead at 12:21 a.m. Lisa Marie Montgomery, born on February 27, 1968, was executed on January 13, 2021, for one of the most horrific crimes in recent memory, the 2004 murder of Bobby Joe Stinnett in Skidmore, Missouri, and the kidnapping of Stinnett's unborn child. Montgomery's case was particularly chilling due to the calculated nature of the crime, the deceptive involvement, and the sheer brutality of her actions. Montgomery met Bobby Jo Stinnett online in a chat room called Ratter Chatter, using the alias Darlene Fisher. She built a relationship with Stinnett, feigning her own pregnancy to gain Stinnett's trust. They exchanged emails and chatted online about their pregnancies, laying the groundwork for Montgomery's horrifying plan. Under the pretext of wanting to buy a rat terrier puppy, Montgomery arranged to meet Stinnett at her home on December 16, 2004. Once inside Stinnett's home, Montgomery strangled the pregnant woman with a pink neon rope and then performed a crude C-section, cutting the premature infant from Stinnett's womb. She then attempted to pass the infant, later named Victoria Jo Stinnett, off as her own. Bobby Jo Stinnett's mother, Becky Harper, found her daughter in a pool of blood about an hour after the attack. The scene was so gruesome that Harper described it as if her daughter's stomach had exploded. The next day, Montgomery was arrested at her farmhouse in Kansas. The newborn baby, Victoria Jo, was recovered and returned to her father. Montgomery's defense team presented evidence of her long history of mental illness and claimed that she was delusional and suffered from pseudocyesis, a false belief of believing pregnant. They argued that her actions were driven by these mental health issues, not by a rational plan. However, the prosecution argued that the crime was premeditated and that Montgomery had maliciously planned the abduction and murder. Lisa Marie Montgomery was executed by lethal injection after the Supreme Court declined to hear her final appeal. Her execution was highly controversial due to her history of mental illness and the unusual nature of her crime. Many argued that her mental state should have been the mitigating factor, while others believed that the severity of her crime warranted the death penalty. When asked if she had any last words, she simply replied no. There is also no reports about what she ordered for her last meal. And that is the end of part 3. Take care, stay safe, and thanks for listening.